Hi, my name's Jeeva Sethu, and this is a podcast for the Nagaratha Sangam UK. I wanted to talk a little bit about those who might be considering a career as a lawyer. I just want to provide a little bit of an overview for those that are interested about my background, how I got into law, and the kind of routes or career path that's involved. I also want to look at the various areas of law that exist and the process to qualification and establishing a career within the law. I'm going to emphasise on the route more as a solicitor, because obviously that's the area that I'm qualified in. But I will touch upon looking at a career at the bar as well, and then we'll look at possible sources of further reference or information. Just by way of background, I'm a partner in a national law firm. I specialise in occupational disease litigation. Litigation is essentially resolving disputes on behalf of individuals or organisations. And I predominantly act and represent individuals who have suffered occupational diseases, which they've often contracted at work or due to their employment, or as a result of unsafe working practices. So I tend to look at where there's been exposure to unsafe working processes, hazardous substances, and where people have typically develop things such as respiratory conditions or skin conditions or neurological or psychological disorders, or maybe musculoskeletal conditions, or often where people have contracted and developed cancer. One of the reasons I particularly enjoy working in the area that I deal with is that I find it very interesting in looking at aspects of medicine in the context of legal principles, and looking at whether you can establish liability for a condition and a potential medical link or cause, maybe to an occupation or an environmental or external process, as against any underlying medical factor or risks that a person may already have. I'm also a visiting lecturer on the legal practice course, which is a postgraduate course for training and aspiring solicitors. In terms of how I got into the law, when I was younger, always wanted to go into a profession. I always wanted to go into a vocation, so in other words, study a vocational subject where you would qualify into that subject area. I've always had a background interest in medicine as well as law when I was at school, but my particular interest in the law stemmed from, in fact, a trip to India when I was visiting family in the summer of 1985, and I was 15 years old at the time. At that time in India, there had recently been the Bhopal disaster, which had occurred in December 1984, and that's still considered to be one of the world's worst industrial disasters. This involved a gas leak from a pesticide plant where there was an emission of highly toxic substances into neighbouring small towns and villages surrounding the plant. The gas leak involved deaths of thousands of people and left many more suffering from serious long-term health conditions, and there was damage to the environment, livestock, farming, fishing, and a number of people contracted severe respiratory or neurological disorders, and there was an effect on the infant mortality rates. Litigation had just begun during the time of my stay in India, and I was following the stories and the articles in the newspapers during that time. The company involved were called Union Carbide India Limited, and they were part of a huge American chemical corporation. the litigation was being pushed between the Indian and US courts, and the American company were being particularly difficult and uncooperative regarding the incident, those that had been affected, and in fact the whole matter itself. One of the significant issues that arose from this litigation was that many of the victims and families who had been affected were from very poor backgrounds, and they had no access to legal advice. So it transpired that the US company knew that many of those families or individuals would accept the first or any offer of money that was made to them, despite in reality a number of those claims being undersettled and people not recovering the full entitlement to damages that they were actually entitled to. So in some ways there was and still remains somewhat a travesty of justice, and that story at that time and those issues had a real strong bearing on my decision to go into law. In terms of the areas of law, well, law covers every aspect of society. Solicitors are often the first point of contact for an individual or a company or an organisation seeking advice, guidance or representation through legal issues. There are various areas of law covering things such as crime, family, litigation, property, corporate, commercial rights and interests, and often solicitors are called upon to advise on, as I say, a variety of areas involving criminal charges, proceedings, family, immigration issues, pursuing and defending litigation, providing technical or regulatory advice, or advising on trusts, tax, financial issues, corporate transactions, which is often the work of city lawyers, and looking at or advising on commercial rights, or sometimes even challenging the government in local authority decisions. Most people will either work in a general practice firm. That means that they may have broad knowledge of a number of practice areas, or often, as is increasingly the case, as with myself, on qualification you tend to specialise within a particular area of practice or field. Most lawyers will work in law firms, that's in private practice, but a number also work in-house, that's being employed by a company or an organisation within their legal department, or often lawyers will work in central or local government sectors. So the opportunities can be fairly wide-ranging. In terms of myself, I studied law, kind of a traditional law degree, LLB honours at Manchester University, and then I went on to the College of Law at York, where I studied the postgraduate diploma in legal practice, which is the necessary part of your study if you want to go on to train or qualify as a solicitor. I then attained a training position at a firm in Manchester, where I spent 2 years as required, and then on qualification I wanted to seek wider opportunities, so moved to London, where I took up my first position as a newly qualified lawyer in litigation, which is the area that I had enjoyed and had quite significant experience of during my training in Manchester. I then subsequently moved to my current firm, where I've been a partner for just under 10 years. London has always traditionally been considered as the legal or financial hub. However, there are a number of very strong regional centres with big practices in areas such as Birmingham, Bristol, Leeds, Manchester. In terms of the process to qualification, as I say, I'll probably emphasise a little bit more on qualifying as a solicitor, as I have obviously a bit more knowledge of that, but we will look at just some of the steps involved in becoming a barrister. The legal profession in the UK is split into two branches. There is lawyers who are solicitors and lawyers who are barristers. And the significant difference is that a solicitor is usually, as I've mentioned before, the first point of contact for someone seeking legal advice or wanting representation on a legal issue. When you work as a solicitor, that does involve some advocacy and often appearing before judges to deal with procedural hearings. However, if a case were to progress to trial, which is essentially a final hearing, either at a court or a tribunal, let's say in an immigration or employment case, and there was an issue that had to be resolved or determined by a court because the parties were unable to reach any kind of agreement regarding that, then often a barrister is instructed to represent the parties at court and also to provide specialist legal advice or on specific issues. Barristers tend to specialise as advocates, so they are highly trained in being able to submit and present a case to a court. They work on a self-employed basis and are frequently instructed by solicitors in relation to a case or an issue. In terms of your training, usually after completing a law degree or equivalent conversion, which I'll touch upon in due course, solicitors are required to attend law school, where you undertake a one-year postgraduate course in legal practice. For barristers, following completion of their degrees, they will spend 1 year at bar school, where that's a course specialising in advocacy, drafting and providing advice. For barristers, following completion of their training at bar school, they are required to secure something called pupillage, which is in effect a training position as a trainee barrister at a set of chambers, which is a set of barristers where a set of barristers practice from, and essentially a barrister is then seeking to apply and become a tenant. In other words, they obtain full membership of that chambers, and they secure a position within that chambers or that set of barristers from where they can then practice. With solicitors, as I say, you would normally spend 1 year at law school, and then you'd concentrate at law school on legal practice and process within various areas. So the study at law school, or on the legal practice course as it's commonly known, is less on the academic and theoretical study of law, the kind of theory of law, but developing the skills that are required in practice, such as to do with interviewing, negotiating, advocacy, legal procedure, and developing practical skills for specific subjects that you may have chosen as part of your position as a trainee solicitor, or hopefully the kind of firm that you want to go on to work for. In terms of the kind of training process, for solicitors, after completing the LPC, you then have to spend 2 years with a firm or a practice, or that can be in-house or with a local authority in a legal department, as a trainee solicitor before qualifying. Traditionally, when you undertake your training, you are required to spend time in what's known as 4 seats. That's essentially 4 different areas of practice where you gain experience, and that can vary depending on the type of firm or the area of practice that you go into. But broadly, it must be contentious and non-contentious. So contentious obviously means disputes or kind of disputed areas of law. Non-contentious could be in relation to commercial, regulatory or advice work. The traditional route for most people is from university to then go to study the LPC and then undertake a position as a trainee solicitor. At university, most people will study the core legal subjects such as contract, crime, land, tort, which is the kind of main area of my practice, the law of tort, and then subjects such as equity and trusts, and then various optional subjects that you can choose to study as part of those core subjects. And at university, the emphasis is obviously on studying legal concepts, principles, statute, and case law. In terms of the routes into practice and qualification, as I say, most people will undertake that traditional route of studying law at university and then going on to study the legal practice course and then trying to secure a position as a trainee solicitor. There are some other options that are also open. You could seek to become a member of the Chartered Institute of Legal Executives. That's essentially where during the course of working you can study towards exams and obtain certificates and diplomas to then obtain an equivalent position on qualification or kind of cross-qualification. Increasingly, a number of people will spend time at firms as paralegals, hoping to then secure a training position. Working as a paralegal is it's non-qualified and you work within a lower position, but it tends to involve more kind of legal assistance and a more supportive role. But for some people, that's a way as hopefully a potential foot in the door within a firm or practice to then hopefully seek an opportunity to secure a training contract or progress from there. If you haven't studied law at university, there is still an opportunity to undertake a conversion course. So a number of people will often embark on a career in law having done non-legal subjects or having not done law at university, and you can undertake a legal conversion course which effectively squeezes the core fundamental and foundation subjects within a year, and then from there you would then seek to obtain a training contract and follow the path into the profession. Law firms still tend to traditionally favour traditional academic subjects, so even where it isn't a non-law degree, the traditional kind of academic subjects are still favoured. The process with respect to qualification and the legal practice course is changing, as at the end of 2021 a new form of assessment called the solicitors qualifying exams are being introduced, so things are changing slowly as we speak. So what does it take to get into the law? What kind of qualities do you need? What are some of the challenges? Well, I think without doubt, for most people, securing a training contract or obtaining pupillage, which is that position as a trainee barrister, is the most challenging. Competition is fierce, and even though the legal practice has become more diverse in recent years and has become more open than it perhaps traditionally once was, you still need to make sure that you shine, that you stand out, that you are resourceful, that you're determined, and that you're committed to a profession in the law. So without doubt, you need to demonstrate strong academics, you need to have or demonstrate intellectual acumen, resilience, attention to detail, teamwork, leadership, commercial awareness, strong communication skills, and often one of the key aspects of being a lawyer is to be able to analyse logically complex legal issues, or being able to assimilate large amounts of information. The best way to try and I think secure that experience is to undertake a work placement scheme. These are run usually during university holidays. You can also undertake shadowing with a firm or a barrister's chambers, which is known as a mini pupillage. If you're at university, you can sometimes become involved in pro bono schemes, which are free legal advice services provided by firms to certain organisations or to groups or charities, and that's an opportunity to get involved with that work. And you can also undertake work at legal advice centres, and some of those opportunities provide a real insight into firms, areas of work, and they can sometimes give you the opportunity to make your mark or create an impression. Certainly with the firm that I obtained my training contract with, I had done a 2-week placement with, and when I applied then for a training contract, I was able to draw upon that experience, which was invaluable when it then came to trying to secure a place with that firm and obtain a training contract. In applying for a training contract, you've got to apply for that towards the end of your second year at university. So in effect, it's 2 years before you actually commence work or start working as a trainee solicitor. So it's therefore important to be focused, to think ahead, to be dedicated and ultimately proactive. You need to kind of start thinking about these things or have some kind of goal or plan in mind, rather than leaving them to the last minute or towards the end of your university course or degree. So what can you do to get further help? Where can you get further information? Well, as I say, I think the important thing is to do your research early. Consider areas of law or firms or interests that you have, and try and obtain relevant work experience if you're able to. Consider the various paths into the legal profession, and think about obtaining, as I say, practical work experience through placements or work shadowing. And as I say, that's something I would really strongly recommend, and can often be invaluable. In terms of further information, I will try and upload some of these sites or these details to this podcast, but Nottingham Law School provide a very good guide to considering a profession in the law or entering the legal profession. There's also a website called lawcareers.net, which provides you with an overview of a career in the law. There's also a platform, an app called Vantage, V-A-N-T-A-G-E, which provides details and opportunities about work experience, vacation schemes, training contracts and insight days. You can also contact the Law Society, which is the governing body for solicitors in England and Wales, or you could also contact the Bar Council or the Bar Association for barristers. But ultimately, qualification can be a long process. It can take a minimum of 5 years, so you need to be dedicated, you need to persevere, and you need to be resilient. A career in the law is challenging but rewarding, and the law continues to evolve and develop. We're now in the situation with Brexit, where a lot of the European law and directives that have been enshrined in UK law have to be reviewed and reconsidered. And often there are legal decisions that can change policy can change the shape of how things are done and progress. So law still has that very relevant place in society, and as I say, is something that continues to change and develop. Just perhaps by way of conclusion, returning to where I started, I read a report that it was from about 2 years ago, in February 2019, that it was reported that Union Carbide, the company that was responsible for the Bhopal disaster in India, which is now wholly owned by a US multinational company, Dow Chemical, had not paid a single cent to almost 470,000 people who were affected, say the Indian government, and this is because they weren't included in settlements that were signed in 1989 and overseen by the Supreme Court of India. It's reported that in some areas of Bhopal, every fifth household has a child with a disability, and the prevalence of cancer among the community is disproportionately high. So, in essence, there's still a lot of work to be done. I hope you found the podcast useful, or at least some way interesting. If you are considering a career in the law, I wish you all the very best and good luck with your endeavours. Thank you.